The key turning in my front door used to be the best sound in the world. It was the signal that my day was over. The commute, the meetings, the endless emails, all of it was done. It meant I was home, my sanctuary, the place I shared with the person I loved most. Now at 32 years old, the sound just feels heavy. The key feels heavy in my hand. The lock feels stiff, and the door swings open on a silence that isn't peaceful. It's the sound of absence. I drop my work bag by the door, the strap leaving a sore red line on my shoulder. The thud it made was the loudest thing in the house. Well, almost. From the spare bedroom that had been converted into his office, I could hear it. The sound that had become the soundtrack to my life for the last 3 years. The frantic, rhythmic click-clack-click of a keyboard being punished. Not the steady, productive typing of someone writing a report or coding a website. No, this was the sound of furious, unfocused energy. The sound of my husband's hustle. I walked past the office door, which was as always slightly ajar. I glanced in. The only light came from the glow of his dual monitor setup, casting his face in a pale, shifting blue. He was 33, but in that light hunched over and completely absorbed, he looked like a teenager who'd been told to go to bed hours ago. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his eyes locked on whatever digital universe he was currently trying to conquer. He didn't even notice me. He never did not right away. For 3 years, for 36 months, this has been our routine. I go to work, I pay for this house, this electricity, the very internet that fuels his dreams. And he works on his big break. When he first quit his job, I was his biggest cheerleader. He was miserable in his corporate gig, and he had this grand vision. He was going to be an online entrepreneur. He used a lot of buzzwords: disruptor, innovator, paradigm shifter. He was going to build a digital empire from this little spare room. In the beginning, it was exciting. I was so proud of his courage. We were a team taking a risk together for a bigger, better future. But the months turned into a year. The year turned into 2. Now we're rounding the corner on year 3, and the only thing he's successfully disrupted is our joint savings account. The only paradigm he's shifted is the one where we were equal partners. Now I was just the provider, the patron. The one who kept the lights on so the dream could stay alive even if the dream itself showed no signs of life. I didn't bother saying hello. He wouldn't have heard me. I went to the kitchen and pulled a bottle of water from the fridge. Leaning against the counter, I took a long drink, the cold plastic crinkling in my hand. The kitchen was a mess. Not filthy, just neglected. A couple of coffee mugs in the sink, crumbs on the counter, the trash can overflowing. It was my turn to take it out, but I was just so tired. I felt a familiar bitter knot tighten in my stomach. It was the resentment. I hated that feeling more than anything. I loved him. I really did. But love doesn't pay the mortgage. Love doesn't fill the gas tank. And love, I was learning, couldn't survive indefinitely on a one-way street. After a few minutes of just standing there, trying to breathe away the exhaustion of the day, I went to our small dining room table. This was my office. My laptop, a stack of mail, and the cold, hard reality of our finances. I sat down the chair, groaning under my weight, and powered up my computer. The first thing I always did was check the bank account. It was a ritual of self-inflicted pain. I watched the number, the one that I worked 40, sometimes 50 hours a week to build, and then I'd start chipping away at it. First, the mortgage. A huge chunk gone in a single click. Our names are both on the mortgage, but the money has only come from my account for 36 straight payments. I have a spreadsheet to prove it. Then the car payment, the insurance, the student loan payment that still haunted me from my college days. Click, click, click. With every payment, I felt a little lighter, but also a little more hollow. I was running on a treadmill, working so hard just to stay in the exact same place. I opened the folder for utilities. The electric bill was higher than usual. Of course it was. His computer setup with all the monitors and the high-end processor ran nearly 24 hours a day. He called it rendering. I called it another $100 I had to find. The water bill, the gas bill. Paid and paid. I was a machine. a bill-paying machine fueled by lukewarm coffee and a dwindling sense of hope. And then I saw it. The last one, the email from our internet service provider. The subject line was in all caps, a digital scream for attention. Final notice your service is scheduled for disconnection. I clicked it open. The body of the email was stark. A balance of $109.99 past due. Payment required within 48 hours to avoid interruption of service. I just stared at it. The internet bill. It was such a small thing compared to the mortgage, a little over $100, but it was everything. It was the pipeline. It was the digital umbilical cord that connected my husband to his fantasy world, a world where he was a CEO, a visionary, a success, just waiting to happen. And I was the one paying for the connection. The account was in my name. I had set it up years ago, back when we first moved in together, back when we were both working, both contributing. It was my legal responsibility. My credit card was the one on file. My name was on the line if it didn't get paid. It was so symbolic it was almost laughable. Here I was funding the very thing that allowed him to escape the reality I was drowning in. Every day I went out into the real world, dealt with real people, solved real problems, and earned real money. I brought that money home, and a portion of it went to pay for the invisible, intangible service that let him stay in his digital world chasing phantom deals and imaginary success. I could hear him in the other room suddenly agitated, a string of frustrated curses followed by a series of frantic, furious clicks. He must have lost a game or had a potential client fall through. These were the only emotions I saw from him anymore related to his work, either the manic excitement of a deal that was about to close or the deep childish frustration of a minor setback. There was never any middle ground. There was never any profit. I looked back at the screen. The amount glowed on the page, $109.99, and right below it the big friendly blue button that said Pay Now. All I had to do was click it, enter my security code, and the problem would go away for another month. The lights on the router would stay blinking. The data would keep flowing, and the dream, his dream, my financial nightmare, would continue uninterrupted. 36 months, over 1,000 days of this. I thought about all the conversations we'd had, the gentle nudges, the serious sit-downs, the tearful arguments in the middle of the night. Every time it ended the same way. He'd accuse me of not believing in him. He'd say the pressure I was putting on him was stifling his creativity. He'd promise with all the sincerity in the world that he was on the verge of something huge. Just a little more time, Aiden. That's all I need. But how much more time? At what point does support become enablement? When did I stop being his partner and start being his safety net? A net so comfortable he had no reason to ever learn how to fly. I minimized the bill and looked at our bank balance again. It was scary. We had nothing saved, an emergency, a car repair, a medical issue, and I'd be completely wiped out. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I thought about his face lit by the monitor, the way he could spend 10 hours straight in that chair without once asking me how my day was. The way our conversations had shrunk now, only revolving around two topics, the stress of my job and the imminent, glorious success of his. I pulled up the internet bill again. Final notice. The words seemed to pulse on the screen. It wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity, a choice. I could keep things as they were safe, miserable, and unsustainable. I could click the button, pay the bill, and buy another 30 days of this slow-motion train wreck. Or I could do nothing. I could just let it happen. I could let the real world finally, after 3 long years, come knocking on his door. The cursor blinked a tiny rhythmic heartbeat on the screen, waiting for my decision. In the other room, the furious clicking continued oblivious. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't exhaustion or resentment. It was a terrifying, exhilarating flicker of power. The power to change things. The power to simply stop. I just sat there staring. The cursor blinked and blinked, a tiny digital metronome, counting down the seconds of my patience. For 3 years, 36 months, I had made the click. I had entered the password. I had authorized the payment. It was muscle memory at this point, another automated piece of my life dedicated to maintaining a status quo that was slowly, methodically grinding me into dust. But tonight, something was different. That flicker of power I felt wasn't just about control. It was about survival. My survival. I pushed my chair back from the desk, the cheap casters groaning in protest. I needed to see him. I needed to try one last time. It was a foolish hope, I knew, but I owed it to the man I married, to the memory of the partnership we once had. I had to give him one final opportunity to step into reality with me before I shut the door. I walked down the short hallway to the spare bedroom we had long ago converted into his office. The door was ajar, and the familiar bluish-white glow spilled out, painting the hallway floor. Inside, he was exactly as I knew he'd be. He was 33 years old, but in the light of the dual monitors, he looked like a teenager locked in for a weekend of gaming. Headset on his body was canted forward, his focus so absolute that the rest of the world, including me, the husband who paid for the electricity running through his expensive computer, had ceased to exist. The air in the room was stale thick with the scent of lukewarm coffee and the low hum of cooling fans. Empty mugs and a plate with toast crumbs from that morning sat on the edge of the desk. This was his command center, his digital kingdom. From here, he was a titan of industry, a visionary entrepreneur on the cusp of greatness. From my perspective, standing in the doorway, he was just a man avoiding his life. I knocked softly on the doorframe. "Honey." No response. His fingers danced across the keyboard in a furious blur. He was probably negotiating some high-stakes deal with a venture capitalist in another time zone, which was his usual code for arguing with strangers on a forum about cryptocurrency. "Honey." I said a little louder this time, stepping into the room. "Can you take off your headset for a minute? We need to talk." He let out an audible, frustrated sigh, the sound tinny and distant through his headphones. He held up one finger, a universal sign for, "Wait a second," without ever taking his eyes off the screen. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, an intruder in my own home. I watched the flickering text on his screen, the meaningless charts, the endless scroll of social media feeds he called market research. I watched him, and I felt the last dregs of my hope begin to evaporate. Finally, with a dramatic flourish and a final decisive click of his mouse, he leaned back in his chair and slowly pulled one side of his headset off his ear. "What's up?" he asked, his tone dripping with the annoyance of a genius interrupted. "I'm in the middle of something big here, Aiden. This is critical." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know, it's just, I was paying the bills, and I need to talk to you about our finances, about where we are right now." His eyes immediately glazed over. This was his least favorite topic. "Aiden, we've been over this. You can't keep stressing about the short term. You have to see the big picture. I'm building an asset. This isn't a job, it's an investment. An investment is supposed to have a return." I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "It's been 3 years. The only thing going out is my salary. Nothing has ever come in, not one single dollar." He actually scoffed, turning his body to face me fully for the first time. "Oh, here we go again. You think this is like your 9 to 5. You clock in, you clock out, you get a little paycheck. That's not how entrepreneurship works. It's about laying the groundwork. It's about building a brand, a presence. The monetization phase comes later, when..." I asked the word hanging in the air between us. When is later? Because from where I'm standing, later is starting to look a lot like never. Our savings are gone. We're living paycheck to paycheck on my salary alone. If the car breaks down, if one of us gets sick, we are completely, totally ruined. He threw his hands up in the air, a gesture of pure exasperation. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This negativity. How am I supposed to manifest success when my own husband is constantly radiating this This energy of failure. You're supposed to be my biggest supporter. I have been supporting you. My voice finally cracked the frustration bubbling over. I have supported you for 1,095 days. I have paid for this roof, this electricity, this computer, the food you eat, and the internet you use to build this thing. I am not your supporter. I am your sole and total financial sponsor, and the bank is running dry. He stared at me, his jaw tight. For a second, I thought he might have actually heard me. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that familiar defensive wall. You want to talk about the internet? He said, his voice low and dangerous. Fine, let's talk about the internet. I am on the verge of closing a multi-level affiliate marketing deal that could set us up for years. It's a brand integration with a new line of wellness supplements. The commission structure is insane. The groundwork is done. The final contracts are being drafted. It's all happening right now online. And you want to come in here and stress me out about $100 utility bill, Keat. It was so textbook, so utterly predictable, I almost laughed. The big deal. It was always just around the corner. Last year, it was an NFT project involving cartoon cats. Before that, it was a drop-shipping business for smart home gadgets. Now it was wellness supplements. The product always changed, but the story was always the same. Success was imminent, and my financial concerns were just an inconvenient distraction. So you have a contract, I pressed, a real one signed with a payment schedule. They're being drafted, he repeated through gritted teeth. You don't understand the nuance of these negotiations. You can't rush them. I'm not rushing you, I said, my heart sinking. I'm asking for a single shred of tangible proof that this is real, that my sacrifice for the last 3 years has been for something other than a fantasy. That was the wrong word to use. His face darkened. A fantasy. You think my dream is a fantasy? He stood up from his chair, finally meeting my eye level. I gave up a perfectly good career to pursue this because I believed I could build something for us, something better than just slaving away for someone else. And all you've done is complain. You don't believe in me. You never have. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. It was his ultimate weapon, the one he deployed every single time I tried to bring up the topic of money. He would twist my genuine fear and exhaustion into a personal failing, a lack of faith in him. For 3 years, it had worked. It had made me feel guilty, silenced me, and sent me back to my laptop to pay another bill to keep the fantasy alive for another month. But not tonight. Tonight his words didn't sting. They clarified. He wasn't seeing me as a partner. He was seeing me as an obstacle. My practicality was an insult to his vision. My reality was a threat to his dream. I looked at him standing there in his kingdom of glowing screens and empty promises, and I didn't see the man I married anymore. I saw a stranger who was perfectly content to let me drown, as long as the Wi-Fi signal stayed strong. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. I just turned around and walked out of the room, leaving him standing there amidst the hum of his machines. I walked back to the living room, back to my laptop. The screen was still lit up, the internet provider's website patiently waiting. Final notice. Pay now. The conversation had done its job. It had extinguished the last ember of doubt. This wasn't a rash decision. It wasn't an act of anger. It was a logical conclusion. It was the only move I had left. My husband had built a world for himself where he was accountable to no one and insulated from all consequences. He had made it very clear that he would not, under any circumstances, leave that world voluntarily. So I was going to turn the lights off. My hand moved to the trackpad, but I didn't move the cursor to the little red X in the corner of the window. That felt too small. I moved the cursor up to the Apple icon in the top left corner of the screen. I clicked. A drop-down menu appeared. I moved the cursor down to the last option, Shut Down. I clicked it. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to shut down your computer now? I stared at the words. Shut down. It was perfect. I wasn't just closing a browser tab, I was shutting down the system. The whole broken, unsustainable system I had been propping up for 3 years. I clicked shut down. The screen went black. The little light on the front of my laptop blinked, once then went dark. The silence was profound. In the other room, I could hear his chair squeak as he sat back down completely oblivious. He had no idea that the foundation of his entire world had just been scheduled for demolition. The payment was due by midnight. The system would process the non-payment overnight. By morning, the signal would be gone. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water, my hands shaking slightly. A wave of nausea and fear washed over me. What had I just done? Would he leave me? Was I destroying our marriage to make a point? The doubt came rushing back cold and sharp. But then I thought about his face, the dismissal, the accusation that I didn't believe in him. He was right. I didn't believe in him anymore. Or rather, I didn't believe in this version of him. I believed in the man who used to have ambition and drive in the real world. The man who was my partner, not my dependent. And maybe this was the only way to get that man back. Maybe I had to tear down the fantasy so he could finally see the reality. I drank my water, the cold liquid doing little to calm the frantic beating of my heart. I went through the motions of getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth, changing my clothes. When I finally slipped under the covers, he was still in his office, working. I could see the sliver of blue light under the door. He was racing against a deadline that he didn't even know existed. Lying there in the dark, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in 3 years, I had stopped pushing the boulder up the hill. I had just let it go. I didn't know where it would land or what it would crush on its way down. All I knew was that tomorrow something would finally irrevocably be different, and I was ready for it. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long, long time, I fell asleep before he did. The next morning, I woke up to a strange and unfamiliar silence. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of a specific sound. The low, constant hum of his high-end gaming computer processing some menial task in the other room. I glanced at the clock. 7:30. He was usually awake hours before me, deep in his digital world. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I got out of bed, a knot of dread and anticipation tightening in my stomach. I walked into the living room, and there he was. He was kneeling on the floor behind the entertainment center, his back to me, fiddling with the router. The little box was dark. No friendly green or blue blinking lights. Just a dead piece of plastic. He didn't hear me come in. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered to himself, unplugging the power cord and plugging it back in again. He waited. Nothing. He did it again. Still nothing. Finally, he sighed in frustration and sat back on his heels. That's when he noticed me standing there. "Hey," he said, his voice tight with annoyance. "The internet's down. I've been trying to get it back online for an hour." I leaned against the doorframe, forcing myself to sound casual. "Oh, that's weird. Did you try restarting it?" He gave me a look that dripped with condescension. "Yes, Aiden. I've restarted it. I've unplugged it. I've checked all the cables. It's dead. The whole network is down." He stood up, brushing dust off his knees. His entire posture radiated agitation. His world, his office. His entire reason for being had vanished. He paced the length of the living room, running a hand through his hair. "I can't believe this. I have a dozen things I need to get done today. I have emails, I have a video call scheduled. This is a disaster." I just nodded, taking a sip of the coffee I hadn't realized I'd poured. "Maybe it's just an outage in the area." I offered the lie feeling slick and uncomfortable in my mouth. "We can check on our phones." He stopped pacing and pulled his phone from his pocket. He tapped the screen a few times, his brow furrowed. "No service bars," he said, his voice rising in panic. "Wait, no, that's just the Wi-Fi symbol with an exclamation point. The cellular data is working." He tapped a few more times. "Okay, I don't see any reported outages nearby. What is going on?" His agitation was like a virus slowly infecting the entire apartment. Without the internet, he didn't know what to do with himself. He tried to work on a document offline but gave up after 5 minutes. He turned on the TV, flicked through the channels, and turned it off with a groan. He wandered from room to room like a ghost, picking things up and putting them down. The silence of the apartment, once a peaceful respite for me, was now a roaring vacuum he was desperate to fill. He was a machine that had been unplugged, and he was starting to spark. By noon, his patience was completely gone. He was standing in front of me. His arms crossed his face, a mask of fury. "That's it. I'm calling them. This is ridiculous. We pay them a fortune for their service, and this is what we get." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the point of no return. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He snatched his phone and dialed the provider's customer service number, putting it on speaker for the apartment to hear. We listened to the hold music, a tinny, upbeat tune that felt like a cruel joke. He tapped his foot impatiently. Finally, a cheerful voice came on the line. "Thank you for calling. My name is Brenda. How can I help you today?" He launched right in, explaining the problem with the clipped, demanding tone of a man who believes he is owed something. Brenda was patient. She asked for our address, our account number. I watched him, my stomach churning. He was so sure of his position, so righteous in his anger at this faceless corporation. He had no idea the call wasn't about them. It was about us. "Okay, Mr. Miller," Brenda said after a moment of typing. "I've pulled up your account. I do see the issue here." "Great," my husband said, relieved. "So you can fix it." There was a slight pause. "Well, sir, the service to your address was suspended effective this morning." My husband's face fell. "Suspended? What are you talking about? Why?" I held my breath. I could feel his eyes starting to turn towards me. "According to our records, sir." Brenda continued, her voice professionally neutral. "The account was suspended due to non-payment. The last bill was overdue, and we didn't receive a payment by the final deadline, which was midnight last night." Silence. The word hung in the air between us. Non-payment. It was an accusation, an explanation, a verdict. My husband slowly lowered the phone. The tinny voice of Brenda asking, "Sir, are you still there?" was the only sound in the room. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked hollowed out. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The look of betrayal on his face was a physical blow. It was worse than I had imagined. "You didn't pay it?" He whispered the accusation, soft and devastating. I took a deep breath. My voice came out steady, much steadier than I felt. "No," I said. "I didn't. You did this on purpose." "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "I did." For a second, I thought he was going to explode. His face went from pale white to a deep, blotchy red. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "How could you—" He finally roared, the sound echoing in our small apartment. "How could you do that to me? You sabotaged me. You know how important my work is. You're trying to control me, to ruin me." He was throwing every accusation he could think of at me, but I didn't flinch. I had prepared for this. I had lived this argument in my head 1,000 times. "Your work," I said, my voice rising to match his. "What work for 3 years, for 36 months, I have paid for this roof over our heads. I have paid for the food we eat. I have paid for the electricity that runs your computer. And yes, I have paid for the internet that you use for your work that has never not once contributed a single dollar to this household." I walked over to the stack of bills on the counter. I picked them up and fanned them out like a losing hand of cards. "This is reality," I said, my voice shaking with the repressed exhaustion of 1,000 lonely nights. "These are real. They don't get paid with potential. They don't get paid with promises of a big deal that's always just around the corner. They get paid with my salary, and I can't do it anymore. I cannot be the only adult in this relationship." He just stared at me, speechless. The anger seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a raw, wounded look. He saw the truth in my words, and I think that's what hurt him the most. I hadn't just cut off his internet. I had held up a mirror, and he didn't like the reflection. "I wasn't enabling a dream," I said, my voice softening. "I was enabling a fantasy, and it has to stop. We are supposed to be partners." He shook his head, a single bitter laugh escaping his lips. He didn't say another word. He just turned, walked to the front door, grabbed his jacket, and slammed the door behind him so hard that a picture frame rattled on the wall. And then silence again. But this was a new kind of silence. It was heavy, final. I sank onto the couch, the adrenaline leaving my body in a rush, leaving me feeling weak and nauseous. What had I done? I hadn't just made a point. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of our life together. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had destroyed everything. I sat there for hours alone in the quiet apartment, staring at the blank TV screen, wondering if he would ever come back. The sun set. The streetlights came on. I didn't move. Every car that passed, I held my breath, hoping it was him. By 9 o'clock, a cold dread had settled in my heart. I had pushed him away for good. It was almost 10 when I finally heard a key in the lock. The door opened slowly. He stepped inside, and my breath caught in my throat. He looked different. The anger was gone. The wounded pride was gone. He just looked tired, bone-tired, like a soldier coming home from a long, pointless war. And he was wearing a uniform. It was a simple dark-colored polo shirt and a matching visor cap. On the chest, embroidered in bright, unmistakable yellow, was a single golden arch. He closed the door quietly behind him and walked into the living room, stopping a few feet away from me. He didn't look at me at first, just stared at the floor. He took off the visor and held it in his hands, turning it over and over. Finally, he lifted his head and met my eyes. There was no anger there, just a quiet resignation and maybe a flicker of something I hadn't seen in a very long time, clarity. "I got a job," he said, his voice low and raspy. He held up the hat as if for inspection. "At McDonald's, down the street. I just finished my first shift." I didn't cheer. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't feel a triumphant surge of victory. All I felt was a profound, overwhelming wave of relief that washed over me so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. The stalemate was broken. He had taken a step. It wasn't a step into a corner office or a venture capital meeting. It was a step onto a freshly mopped floor under the fluorescent lights of a fast food restaurant. It was a step back into the real world, a step back toward me. I just nodded slowly. "Okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Okay." He nodded back, a silent, mutual understanding passing between us. The apartment was still quiet. The internet was still off. But for the first time in 3 years, it didn't feel empty. It felt like we were finally, truly back online.